everybody. Welcome to another fun episode of the Co-Living Code Show. My name's Christine. I am the CEO of Kindred, which is software for this industry. And this week, we bring on somebody who understands the market in India like nobody else I know. And everybody knows that market is growing very rapidly in co-living, like insanely fast. We go deep into numbers. You guys are going to love this episode. Ajay Kumar is the co-founder of TheHouseMonk, which is prop tech for real estate and co-living. So just like Kindred is, they are doing the same thing in India. I've already sent them a few clients over there. And TheHouseMonk is a customer experience management platform built for the real estate businesses. And from the time a potential customer discovers your business to when they transact and become a customer to their lifecycle management, billing, communication, support, the entire value chain is brought into one platform, making it very easy to deliver an unforgettable experience. And again, they deal with co-living spaces, student accommodation, co-working, and property managers. And Ajay knows like the numbers and the growth and the metrics. Like he's very, very deep in this industry and he was actually an operator first, so his story mirrors mine, since about 2013. So enjoy this week's episode of the Co-Living Code Show. Hello, everybody. Christine here with my next guest, Ajay Kumar with TheHouseMonk over in Bangalore, India. And we're going to go super deep on the market in India and Asia in general, because I don't think we've touched enough on the show about that. And me and Ajay got introduced a couple weeks back. I think we almost talked for an hour on video, just like
Right.
he knows that is like your market. I'm like, okay, we have clients on our waiting list for our software. I'm just sending them to you. I mean, it's very deep knowledge in prop tech. So like, let's start, and his story mirrors mine. Essentially operated a co-living operation in India and realized he needed software. So then he built his own software, a story just like mine with Kindred Quarters. So Ajay, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Christine. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. So let's start with your journey. How did it start? Let's go back to the beginning. And what year?
So I got into the prop tech space around 2013, 2014. And I started by doing a play on the real estate brokerage market in India. It's super fragmented, highly unorganized. And we started by taking a stab at building some products and services in that market. Didn't quite work out. We moved on to the property management industry, and then we became a co-living operator ourselves. And lots of twists and turns in the journey. But today we find ourselves as a broad horizontal player in the prop tech community. We build multiple products and services for co-working companies, co-living companies, property managers, real estate developers, and a whole bunch of other use cases as well.
No, and so let's talk about, so it's called Cozy Homes, your co-living, right? That you had?
Sure. Yeah.
How many,
that's right.
and you got
Cozy
up to,
homes.
and I laughed because how many beds did you get up to?
About 1,500.
Okay, and you said that was too small.
So, I think for all of the listeners, especially from the United States and Europe, they really need to get used to bigger numbers when discussing Asia, because everything in Asia is really, really big, with respect to numbers and metrics. So to give a sense of the numbers, there's about 150,000 people staying in organized co-living spaces in India right now. And when you count unorganized spaces, that number balloons to somewhere between 2 to 4 million. So that's a huge, huge market. China plays at a scale that only China plays at. So I'm not even going to start about the scale of the Chinese market. It's 10 times bigger than the rest of the world put together. So let's not talk about China for now, but India is a huge opportunity in itself. The largest co-living operators have portfolios which are tens of thousands of beds or rooms that they're managing. So at one point when we found ourselves with about 1,500 people staying in our facilities, we realized that, hey, we're really tiny, in comparison to everyone else in the market. So we felt really small.
I love it. Well, okay, again, for our listeners, and most people know this, but I mean, the population there is what, 1.35 billion people in India.
Yep.
And then if you take all
That's
of
right.
Asia, it's 4.5 billion roughly.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's a lot of people.
More than half the world. Yeah.
More than half the world, exactly. And so, yeah, 7.7 billion, I think, right now for world population. And, I tell people this, there's close to an 8 million bed shortage in just India alone. And they're like, well, what do you mean a shortage? I mean that there's students commuting 2 hours one way to university.
Yep.
So they could be
Yep.
commuting for 4 hours a day, right?
Yeah. That's really common here. So one of the points that we need to keep in mind is that typically rental housing has not happened in a very organized way. What I mean is that real estate developers have exclusively built housing with the purpose of selling it off, right? So we don't have residential REITs here. We don't have private equity funds that own multifamily housing units. That's really not a thing, right? So every housing unit in India was pretty much constructed for the purpose of selling it off to someone who wants to come and stay in it. And when they choose not to do it, then they rent it out for maybe a few years till they want to come and occupy it themselves. So where we actually find ourselves is that there's actually no organized rental housing stock, and that's one of the biggest opportunities that everyone's really moving on. Also because, well, one is that the rental housing is not actually accumulated in parts of the cities where you need rental housing. They're kind of like scattered all about. Second is that the rental yields in India are very, very low in comparison to global standards, right? So when you look at rental yields in India, it's typically 2 to 3%, and it touches about 4% in certain cities and certain markets. But yeah, it's as low as 2% in places like Bombay and New Delhi. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And again, to
So
compare
it's
to, I think 20% is pretty average here. And for co-living, it could get up to 30%. Whoa.
uh, yeah.
Okay.
So what's kind of happened is that now that a lot of real estate developers have been looking at the co-living market and the purpose-built student accommodation market as well, they've kind of realized that you can get yields as much as 7, 8, 9%. If the housing inventory is designed correctly and if the location is good. So now we're starting to see some institutional capital flow into the rental housing market. And obviously, given that we have a lot of good operators here, who have shown that they can manage operations at scale, that's given a lot more confidence into the industry as well. So really good time to be in the rental housing space in India.
Nice. No, and then let's talk about you. Last time we chatted, it was talk about this paying guests model. I had never even heard of this.
Oh, yeah. So I think the paying guest model I think it's salient to India. But let me maybe give some context around housing for young people, the bachelors and bachelorettes in the country. There is a social stigma where most landlords do not want to rent out their properties to bachelors and bachelorettes, right? So if you're three guys or three girls or however it is, and if you're looking to rent a 3 bedroom, it's very difficult for you to find a place because landlords would rather rent it out to families, and this extends across the country, all cities, most locations. Landlords would possibly go down on the rent by 20 to 25% if a family would rent their property versus giving it to single folks. So that's a huge problem that India has always faced. And so around about 2010, 2011, 2012, so around about that time, what kind of happened was that the country realized that there is such a shortage of quality rental housing for young people. But given that we have so many tech companies and product companies coming up over here, their affordability kept increasing, right? So the millennials and younger population really wanted access to good quality housing. And that's kind of when, co-living started making an entry into the market. Their alternative was the paying guest model, which you've actually brought up. So paying guest is typically a mom and pop kind of a business, which is normally set up. It's typically like a husband and wife. They take a small family unit, which maybe has 30, 40, 50, 60 rooms. So they put in beds, they give food. So it's a very soft landing for you, if you're just looking, to share a room with someone. So you can directly land into one of these paying guest facilities. They're really affordable. To give you a sense of the numbers, you can get a room which you would have to share with one more person. So as we call it, a double sharing room, for about $100 a month. So that's a really low price point. Yeah.
With food.
So $100 is a lot. Yeah, but with food as well. Yeah. So $100 is a lot more in India, but even once you adjust for purchase power parity, it's not a very heavy burden on the pocket. So the paying guest model was very, very common for young people. So normally when you move into a new city, you likely are going to take a paying guest facility and going to stay there. But as I said, as the young people started making more and more money because they started getting better jobs, especially in the technology industry, they wanted access to better quality housing, and that's what co-living companies have been doing over here. So that's one of the more interesting trends to keep in mind, that what has really propelled co-living in India is not that it fosters community, but it's actually because there is such a lack of good quality accommodation for young people that when the first models of co-living started coming up, this was around 2013, 14, 15, it really, really broke out and grew very quickly. So co-living operators, as many buildings or as many properties that they could onboard, they kept getting filled, within a week or 2 weeks. And that's when we really knew that, there is something special happening in the co-living sector in India.
No, I love that. And so are they taking existing buildings or existing hotels, or are they building ground up? Like how
Yeah.
are they?
When the industry started in 2013, 14, so Nestaway is one of the biggest players over here. They started by getting their hands on any inventory that they could get. So, they used to get, let's say, a 2-bedroom apartment in this building and a 3-bedroom apartment in that building and a 5-bedroom apartment in that building. So, they just used to get inventory like in a very disaggregated fashion, but they used to furnish it and, give it out on a sharing basis to, typically it's 2 people per room. So that's kind of how the industry started. But within a couple of years, everyone kind of realized that you do need to consolidate inventory. So there has been a lot of action, as you've quite rightly mentioned. So a lot of hotels are getting repurposed into co-living, and even a lot of small apartment buildings which have maybe like 10 2-bedroom apartments, or maybe like 22-bedroom apartments. A lot of these apartments are getting repurposed into co-living right now, and that's pretty much the mainstay of the co-living economy in India at the moment. But what we are starting to see is that a lot of capital is going into the purpose built facilities. So over the last 2, 3 years, real estate developers have been looking at the co-living market quite intently. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but there has been, well, I wouldn't say a crash, but the real estate market has been flatlining for a few years now. And real estate developers are finding it a little difficult to sell off their properties, whatever they're constructing. So they've started constructing co-living assets which they can hold on to, which are giving them much higher yield as well. So we're starting to see a lot of purpose-built facilities coming onto the market. I think the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see a huge chunk of properties hitting the market. My estimate is that there's going to be at least 100,000 rooms which are going to get delivered over the next 2 to 3 years in the purpose-built co-living model, and that's going to be really interesting because the yields, at least, like, so I've been looking at a lot of Excel spreadsheets that co-living operators have been offering to real estate developers on what kind of yields you can get, and like how they should construct. So the numbers are really, really promising. So if it actually lives up to what's being promised on these Excel sheets, I think it's going to be a huge win for the entire industry.
No, and that's why I'm bringing you on the show, because you have so much knowledge, deep, deep knowledge. Like, let's talk about the Rental Housing Association of India. Did talk
Yeah,
about that?
definitely.
Okay, did you guys put that together? Or was
Definitely.
it already in play?
No, we kind of put that together. It incidentally started as a WhatsApp group. So in 2016, we were about like 4 or 5 co-living operators, and we were trying to, like, we were trying to get all of us into the same room at the same time, but that just did not happen. And a few months later, we said, "Hey guys, why don't we start with a WhatsApp group?" And we did that, and then we used to discuss a lot of challenges that everyone was facing, whether it was good best practices with respect to co-living, interface ourselves with the government, because we have a lot of, obviously we're competing on one side, but there's a lot of common interest that we need to protect as well. Earlier this year, we kind of formalized that as an official industry body. So we have about 50 co-living operators who are part of the group. We are trying to ensure that best practices are shared across all the operators. We're trying to make sure that we safeguard the interests of the tenants and the industry from a long term perspective. We're also trying to see if we can interface with the government as well, right? So there are so many questions from a regulation standpoint with respect to co-living, right? So is it going to be classified as a residential asset because people are staying in it long term, or is it going to be classified as a commercial asset, because there's an operator who's going to be profiting from this business? How are you going to zone it? Can you have a co-living building in a residential part of town? Should it be in a commercial part of town? Is there going to be VAT or service tax or sales tax or GST, or is there going to be any tax applicability on co-living? So there are so many questions which are currently unanswered, and we want to make sure that we represent the best interests of the entire industry to the government, and hopefully help them understand the industry a little bit better as well. So anyway, it's been about like 12 months for us after we started Rental Housing Association of India, but we're off to a good start, and we're strongly lobbying that all countries try to come out with an industry body of their own as well.
No, I love that. No, we've talked about it, creating a coalition in Los Angeles. I'm in talks with
Oh,
a
right.
couple large operators because you're right. Like, when you're creating a new industry, you want to kind of get ahead of all the regulation and
Yeah,
kind of have an open dialogue. And you nailed it. Like,
yeah,
what are best
yeah,
practices, and work in conjunction with the government,
yep,
municipalities, and see, hey, how can we do this the
yep.
right way, just from the get go? Versus, well, you would tell me, I mean, can't they go in India, can't they go back like 5 years and like tax kind of just,
Yes. Yeah, we have this really bad thing where a lot of times when the government enacts a new law, they say, hey, this is the law, but this is actually applicable from the year 2010, and you've got to go and pay your back taxes for the last 9 years. So that's a really bad thing. So there's a lot of really big companies which have burnt deep holes in their own pockets because of these. So we want to make sure that none of that happens. So we want to paint a positive picture of the future, and it is as well. We do understand that there is need for regulation. All we ask is that we want to be part of the conversation. So we don't want the government to decide without deeply understanding the needs of operators and without deeply understanding the industry. So we've already started having dialogues. We're helping them understand why this is important. We're helping them understand our challenges in running co-living businesses. And the government so far has been fairly receptive. So we're encouraged. We're hoping for the best.
good. Okay, good. That's good to hear. And then, because again, I think they see again, they're just seeing the problem. Because it's such a massive
Yeah, yeah.
shortage,
Uh,
massive, like it's insane.
So maybe I can talk a little about maybe one particular case study which has happened in China, right? So maybe about like 10 years ago or so, the Chinese government also realized that there is an acute housing shortage, and not everyone's going to buy houses, right? So rental housing has to be part of the long-term plan. And what they did was that they encouraged real estate developers to come up with rental housing. And what they did was they allowed rental housing stock to be classified as an infrastructure asset. So what that means is that now you can take loans from banks at a much cheaper rate than you would take if you're constructing residential apartments or commercial buildings or whatnot, right? So this is what the Chinese government did for the rental housing industry. This was about 7-8 years ago. But what actually happened was real estate developers constructed huge assets. So many co-living operators and rental housing operators came into the market. There was such cutthroat competition that two things happened essentially. So first is that there were so many rental housing operators in China that they started competing with each other to get developers to give them their properties. As a consequence of this, they started increasing the price. And where China is finding itself right now is that despite the government giving infrastructure status to rental housing assets, the thought was that it should make housing a lot more affordable. It's actually made it a lot more expensive, right? So they did not plan on this happening this way. So the average, I was reading this report the other day, the average Chinese tenant used to pay about 15 to 17% of their monthly salary towards rent. Now in parts of Beijing and China and Shanghai, it's starting to increase towards like 20 to 25 to 30%. So that's a plan that kind of like backfired. There's another thing also which happened. I don't know if you know of this company called Dinjia, which is once again a Hangzhou-based Chinese co-living company. So they did something really smart, which is that once a tenant signed up for 12-month lease with them, they used to sell the lease term to a bank, and they used to get the rent amount from the bank upfront, right? So when you sign the contract, you as a tenant, you're actually saying that, hey, I'm going to pay the rent to the bank, and the bank actually gives me, the operator, 12 months of your rent upfront, which now I can go and use for expanding my business. So this is a great idea on paper, but it went really wrong because the company shut down, right? So the consequence was that the tenants are now stuck repaying the bank for a rental house that doesn't exist.
Mm.
So now, these are all learnings that are coming out of the Chinese market, and we definitely want to make sure that these things don't happen in other parts of the world, right? So we want to make sure that rental housing remains affordable whilst being profitable for operators. We want to make sure that tenants trust co-living operators and rental housing operators as well, because once the trust is broken, it doesn't matter which company broke the trust. The trust starts breaking with the entire industry. So now that's something that we want to safeguard in India, and I think that's something that all countries should be looking at more seriously.
No, for sure. And so that's interesting. So the going back to the ground up development in India that's happened, that you're seeing being built, co-living from the ground up.
Yeah.
Like, are they
Yeah.
creating, do you see them creating, like using density? Are they putting like bunk beds at all, multiple beds in the room,
Yeah.
smaller bedrooms? Like, how do you see them creating that density?
Um, so experiments are starting. Let me put it that way. So we don't know
Okay.
what's going to be the so we don't know what's going to be what's going to be the model that's going to last. But what we are seeing is that the scale of these facilities are pretty huge. So the other day I was in a co-living, purpose-built co-living facility, which is going to house about 1,200 people in one facility. So that's a huge facility, right? Well, in general, like formulas are starting to come up saying that, if you're going to do a purpose-built facility where broadly two people are going to share a room, you need to have about 120 square feet for each tenant, right? So if you're
Oh.
looking at a facility, yeah. So if you're like looking at a facility which is going to house 1,000 people, you're likely looking at about 120 to about 150,000 square foot of built-up constructed area. So that's I mean, obviously it changes anywhere from 120 to 200 depending on how you're going to be doing up the space. But that's something that's starting to happen. People are starting to construct a lot of common facilities. So what we're seeing obviously is that globally a trend is that houses are getting smaller, or sorry, bedrooms are getting smaller, but common areas within houses are getting larger. Something similar is being noticed in the co-living market as well, where we're looking at rooms which are fairly tiny, but we're looking at a lot of space, common space, which are meant for people to come out and interact with each other. That's definitely something that's a positive trend that we're seeing in the market.
And then talking about that, the community aspect, because then again, I know the number one reason,
Yeah,
people are trying to save like time and money, and that's why they live
yeah, yeah,
together.
yeah,
It's not community
yeah,
necessarily, but do you see that starting to
yeah.
evolve? Do you see community being built? Do you see events happening? Or no, they just want to roof a bed close
Um,
to work.
Let me put it this way, like with my, obviously, like I speak to a lot of co-living operators here. It's on everyone's mind for sure, and a lot of people are acting on it very actively, right? So they're doing a lot of events together, especially around holidays and festivals. And in India, we have a lot of festivals, so they definitely do something around the festival times. A lot of them are starting to, like organize events every weekend, something to get people out of the room. So definitely something is happening, and the roadmap for the next 12 to 36 months, I can definitely say that every co-living operator wants to figure out how can they better help the community, and possibly how can they monetize from the community beyond the rent as well. Having said that, it's not the highest priority right now. So the highest priority is, we have about 50 co-living operators, and we have only about 6 or 7 main cities in India. So everyone's number one focus is getting more supply and figuring out, how do we get more people into these facilities? Because the need from the market, Christine, is really, really around, hey, we still need good quality access to housing. So that's definitely like a strong number one priority, but definitely like, building and fostering community is starting to increase, or the importance of it is starting to increase.
So if like somebody has a tech job in the center of Bangalore, like what's an average commute time? Just so I can put it in reference. Like what's normal, considered
Mm,
normal? Like an hour to commute to work?
yeah, an hour one way, 45 minutes to an hour one way is fairly normal in Bangalore. It would be considered like, yeah, Bangalore, Delhi, Bombay, there's a lot of traffic. So 45 minutes to an hour is common in most of these cities. Hyderabad, Chennai, Pune, these are not very traffic centers, but definitely in Bangalore, like 45 minutes to an hour is a given for most people.
And then again, talking about the students. So the students are commuting in a long distance. Like what else is creating this
Yeah.
massive shortage? So is it mostly university students or is it people, younger professionals?
Um, No, once someone becomes one big challenge is that I can't, I'm not sure if I can say most, but a lot of students still stay at their home with their parents when they're doing university, right? So it's not a given that, oh, if you go to college, you're gonna move away from home. That's not really a thing. A lot of people continue staying at home through college as well. Now that becomes the challenge because it's likely that your parents have a house inside the city, but the universities are typically in the suburbs or way outside. So that's one of the biggest reasons why students end up commuting a lot. A second point also to keep in mind is that given that universities are fundamentally located in the outskirts of the city, real estate developers have not really thought about building housing over there, right? So that's another reason why people do have to, do a long commute. For most engineering colleges in India, they typically have hostel facilities in and around the campus, but that's restricted to, like a few colleges. So that's once again that's not 100% of colleges. I would say maybe like 50 to 60% of universities will have an on-campus residential facility, but for the rest of them, you do have to find a place outside.
Got it. No, no, no. That makes a lot of sense. And then, so, what is the percentage of rent? Because you had mentioned China, the average
Yeah,
percentage of income spent
yeah,
on rent. And, I told you,
yeah,
you'd asked me the States, and I was like, it's 30, in the cities, it's 30%. Like, that's normal. And then in New
yeah,
York,
yeah,
in the center of New York, people could be spending 50% of their income on rent, which is
yeah,
like half, and they're
yeah.
never there. So for India, what's common in India for percentage of rent to income?
um, Typically, people pay about 15% of their monthly income as rent. So it can go somewhere between 10 to 20%. So you can maybe average it out at about 15%. Um, well, if you really want a very nice place in the center of the city, then maybe it goes up a little bit more than that. But it's typically not more than 20%.
Okay, got it. No, that makes sense. And
That's
do you
more of a
guys?
cultural norm.
Mhm.
What kind of happens? I think this is a little bit more around culturally how India is. So home ownership is very important in India. So we all have parents who bought houses in their 20s, and they ended up repaying it. They ended up repaying the loan over a 20, 30-year time period. But it's really critically important, if you're an Indian, that you should own a house. So if you're going to be paying more than 15% of your monthly income towards your rent, the thought process immediately is that, hey, I might as well buy a house and start paying the monthly repayment. So that's the reason why Indians have traditionally stayed away from paying more in rent.
Yeah, so, okay, and similar to the States, right? All our parents had the 30-year mortgages. However, the millennials and Gen Z, like these next generations, you don't see that following trend over there where the younger
Yeah,
generations are like, oh, I want freedom. I don't need to own. Or do they all still
yep.
really want to own real estate?
I'm not quite sure. Yeah, there is, even in India, right? There's definitely a trend of people pushing back home ownership by a significant amount of time. So normally the trend is that once people are married, they within a year or two they end up buying a house of their own. But we're starting to notice that's not happening, right? So even the rental demographic that we're starting to notice of tenants who are coming in, we're starting to see older and older people, people who are well into their 40s, people in their 50s who
Mm.
already have kids. They're starting to rent homes, which would have been unheard of maybe 10, 20 years ago, but that's really starting to happen. So yes, so the same trend that you're seeing in the US is applicable in India as well. What we do have to see is that the prices, so one of the reasons why, so it's not like people are against home ownership, but the prices are very, very high. It's gotten to the state where it's completely unaffordable. We are expecting the market to correct. We've been expecting the market to correct for quite a few number of years now, but it's not yet corrected. But we think that's going to happen. So I think within the next few years, if the price corrects, then we might see a trend of people going back and buying home, younger people going back and buying homes again. But failing that, I don't see that trend changing over the next 3 to 5 years at least.
No, I think you're exactly right. And it's funny, and I think I told you already, we had an inquiry that said, yeah, we're going to launch, 20,000 beds within a year, 20,000 beds, and then up to 100,000 within 3 years. And my team was like, oh, this is a fake inquiry. This is not real. I go, no. I said, because it came through email. I said, no, that's India. Like, that's normal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because you said, yeah, I mean, you're saying 100,000 purpose ground up development in the next couple of years. That's not even counting.
Next
Do
three
you know
years, yeah.
what's the number like collectively? Do you know the number collectively right now in like the next couple of years? Not just purpose built, but also, conversions, hotels that are
Sure.
converting. Yeah, a bed count.
So, so as of today, we have about 150,000 people staying in organized co-living facilities in India. We're expecting that this number would likely reach 500,000 within the next 3 years.
That is amazing. Yay. And you're building the software to help with that because that's a lot. So no, I wanted to ask you this question. So obviously, like the visitor, you guys have to even account for like visitor management, especially in these larger properties, right?
Yeah. So visitor management is so security is a very big concern in most emerging economies, and India is no different. So definitely, there's a lot of and another thing that's really propelling the need for a security and a visitor management system is that now people are refusing to step out of their homes for anything, right? So everyone wants everything delivered. People don't want to go to an offline store to buy something. They don't want to go to an outside restaurant. So everything is going to get delivered. So what we're seeing is that the speed with which deliveries are increasing in India is unprecedented. That's possibly the fastest growing segment of Indian consumer internet. So there are so many deliveries happening. So anyway, so that's one of the that's a context that a bunch of deliveries are happening. So now, if you as a co-living operator or a property manager, or if you're managing any kind of real estate asset, you need to keep in mind that there's possibly going to be hundreds of unauthorized people who are going to be coming in and leaving your facilities every single day. And at the end of the day, you do need to provide some amount of security to residents who are staying in your buildings. So that's the need for security management overall, and that's something that we help with as well.
Do you see much of smart apartments? Like, are they building like as far as like wireless access control? Were they, anything off the cell phone? Did you see any of that technology? Yeah.
Uh, the technology is very much available, and it's actually been available for many years now. But we're not seeing too much adoption. Frankly, I mean, definitely the adoption is increasing, but it's not as much as the potential that the market offers, right? So we don't really see a lot of, let's say, keyless access cards or fingerprint based, like door lock systems. So the technology is there. Possibly we have a bunch of early adopters, but their penetration is very small compared to the market size.
Interesting. Okay, so maybe with time that'll get there soon. And
Yeah.
and I know you're going to do a tour. Well, you've already seen, but you're going on like a proper tour of co-living in India, right? Okay, I'm going to try to go with
Yeah, I
you.
keep doing that anyway.
I know you're doing it anyway, but maybe the outside cities. Do you have a lot of
um,
future ones that you need to take a look at?
so I've been extending this invitation to so many people who are involved in the co-living industry. So I've been trying to convince Gee to come on board as well. Like, I'm more than happy, if you can make a trip down to India as well. Because I think the Western world, really does need to see the scale at which co-living is operating in India. And we have a lot of operators here, who have seen significant scale. And so I think it'll be a very interesting exchange of learning, because I was making this point the other day to someone that in US and Europe, we feel, or at least I personally feel, that co-living companies are focusing a lot on community, which is definitely really important. But they have not yet cracked scale. And in India, like, I feel companies are starting to crack scale, but they've not really figured out the community, because no one's really thinking too deeply about how do I build community and how do I help my tenants beyond, giving them a space to live. So I think, like, we do need a good exchange of ideas so that everyone can learn from everyone else.
I love that. No, and I love bridging that gap because I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
everybody's like, oh no, India's like, they're doing their own thing. Like, I'm like, no, but why? Again, this needs to be a global movement to where anybody could jump around anywhere in the world and
Yeah.
co-live and kind of know what to expect. So
Yeah.
I'm there with you. And yeah, I put it for 2020, like it's on my list to come out finally because I just keep
Yeah.
hearing
Yeah. Yeah.
amazing things. And just, you're right. You guys are, the scale is like insane. I would just love to see that in person for sure. But I think, with that said,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
curious if there's a real estate correction or if the economy shifts in any sense, right? The
Mm-hmm.
downturn, which
Mm-hmm.
happens,
Mm-hmm.
anywhere, I'm talking about
Mm-hmm.
anywhere in the world, like what's gonna, I think the vacancy rates, occupancy rates are gonna decrease. Right now
Right.
they're like so high, so people don't even have to try. Like, again, even in the States, these co-living concepts are getting fully occupied as the second they open. And I'm curious to see, because I truly believe the community and the brands are going to start rising to the top once that happens,
Yeah.
right? Because right now, just
Yeah.
people need a place to live, so it doesn't matter as much. But if that
That's true.
changes, it's going to shift, and I think that will set people apart as far as operators.
Yeah. Well, one of the challenges I feel in being a co-living operator is that your service becomes a commodity once there are a bunch of other operators, right? Because you're not really doing too much more to the space, because there's a building which is available. You're going to repurpose it in certain ways to make it co-living. you're going to market using possibly the same channels that everyone else is using to market. So there isn't really too much differentiation. So the ways that you can truly differentiate yourself are if you can maybe do up the design and the interiors of the space in such a different way that people start coming to they prefer staying in your facility over others. We do have a couple of examples of that in India, where the space itself is a differentiator. It's been designed in such a wonderful way that tenants want to stay in such buildings. But failing that, the only other differentiator that I can really think about is if you can foster such a strong sense of community that once any tenant wants to leave, they're just going to get their friend to come in and stay, in their place. So, and like whether you're going to do it through events, whether you're going to do it by having community cooking sessions, or I think people can get very creative on how they can build community. But if you do have a strong community that you've developed, I think long term that itself can be a differentiator. Even though it's going to be a little more difficult to build community at such scales, but if you do manage to crack that, I really believe that can be a differentiator.
I love that. No, that's helpful for everybody listening or watching the show for sure. So please keep that in mind. Again, if things shift, just the ways you can make your concept, amazing. And you're right. I think putting in the extra time up front on the build out, considering all the things, I think the ones that will do the best too are the purpose-built co-living. And I just met, there's one in Los Angeles, a big high rise that they're trying to push through in the city. I saw the renderings. Nice. It looks incredible. It's an amazing location in Los Angeles. It's probably like 3 years out, but again, they're building knowing it's going to be mixed use, like co-living, co-working, and these amazing facilities, and they're going all in. And I always tell people, like, I'm telling you, don't, because some developers are putting it where it's kind of like, okay, be co-living, but maybe we switch it back to multifamily. And so, I mean, these are buildings that are 4-bedroom, 4-bath. I guess you could convert it back to a regular roommate situation and at least everybody has their own in-suite bathrooms. So yeah.
That's something that we're noticing as well. So it's kind of like a lot of real estate developers don't want to jump all the way into co-living. So they want to keep 1 foot on the ground here while taking a leap with the other. So even here, like I'm seeing a lot of purpose-built facilities where they kind of design a huge floor, but for separating the studios for co-living, they're actually using temporary walls and permanent walls, because they always want to retain the option that in case this doesn't work out, I can break down all the walls and construct apartments and sell it off. Right. So that's something that I have noticed. So I'm able to relate to what you just said.
Oh God. Okay. So it's going around. So everybody's China. I know. Real estate developers, again, they're sometimes they're a little less risk. They're more risk adverse. So it's okay. But again, I've already.
The challenge is that real estate developers, I think for co-living to be a 50-year phenomena and not just a 5-year phenomena, you really need real estate developers to be involved. Because unless they create the assets, we're not going to have any space to operate on. So it's really, really important that we convince real estate developers that it's worth developing these assets. So I think, and also one point to keep in mind is that they actually have most to lose if this thing doesn't work, right? Because they're investing a crazy amount of capital to make sure that this works. So it's traditionally been a slow to move industry, but what I am encouraged by is that developers, especially in Asia, have been moving on the co-living opportunity fairly quickly. So that's an encouraging sign, and I hope that continues.
And then who are some of the largest players right now in India? Like I've kind of seen, and again, I know some of the hotel players are switching, like branching off to co-living.
Can you just repeat that question?
Yeah, sorry, I think it cut out. Who are the largest players right now in India?
In co-living operators?
Yes.
We have Nestaway, we have Zolo, we have Coliv, which is starting to make some good inroads. Oyo has entered into the space, so they're doing reasonably well. We have Campusville, we have Stanza Living. So the last two are in the student housing market. There's Oxford Caps as well, which is also in the student housing market. So my estimate is that there's at least 7 or 8 players who have a portfolio upwards of 10,000 beds in their under management, and we possibly have another 15 to 20 which are somewhere between 1,000 to 10,000.
Wow. Okay, that's a big market.
Yeah.
That's amazing. No, I love it. No, thank you. So I know I told you we go long. We were trying to keep,
man.
You wanted to keep 30 minutes. I said, Ajay, we're definitely going to probably go.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah, yeah.
I mean, you're so knowledgeable. And again, I know people listening that are curious about the market over there. Like, I just love your wealth of knowledge on all the numbers and what's going on over there. So we gave everybody insights into that market.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on this show this week. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be on your show, Christine. It's been a
Definitely.
pleasure.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for checking out today's episode. If you want to learn more about co-living, you could check out my book on Amazon, The Co-Living Code. And of course, if you're looking for the perfect software to power your co-living concept, check out kindred.io, KNDRD.io. Thanks. And a quick thank you to SPX Agency for all of the graphics, animation, and design on our YouTube channel.